Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, this DebateSensei NFA edition, where we talk about things relevant to the National Forensics Association Lincoln Douglas debate event. And so I have two experts, Dr. Justin Kirk from University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Chad Meadows from Western Kentucky University. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, yes. Thank you.
So, some debate associations have coaches polls. Some debate associations have running point systems. So what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of a really, really informal version of a sort of like mid-season assessment of, of debaters. And so both Justin and Chad sent me their top 10, but I wanted to kind of hand it off to each one of you about how did you decide who would be put on there? What sort of criteria do you have on how you ranked people and whether or not they made the list at all?
I can briefly go first. So I would say that there were two primary criteria that I used. The first one was consistency. A lot of debaters had a great tournament or two. I think very few debaters had several tournaments that were all very good or great. That was like something that helped to distinguish, because I think a lot of tournaments had different people placing differently at different tournaments this semester. And then the second thing that I used was just results at tournaments with a lot of overlap with other debaters that I thought were at the top of sort of like the bracket. So tournaments like, for instance, the UNT tournament really weighed heavily in my rankings, because at that tournament you were hitting the best debaters from several other teams. WKU's tournament was one as well. Tournament. There are several tournaments that I use, but the more tournaments, or the more overlap with other people that I felt like were getting into the top 10, the more I felt that like that tournament played a role in my ranking.
How about you, Justin?
So very similar. I would say that a couple of other things I kind of incorporated. So I think the top two tournaments weighted wise for me were definitely Western Kentucky and North Texas. They seem to have the most kind of accumulation of talent at those tournaments, as well as the Alexis Elliott round robin. I incorporated into that a little bit because that's an opportunity for you to evaluate head-to-head matchups that you normally don't get. You don't always get to debate the person right next to you in the top five. So I looked at those and weighted that a little bit more, because you've got two judges in those rounds, and those are head-to-head debates with like no prep, right? So all these debaters are going in with basically an even playing field, and so that's really where I think the tiebreakers could come down. And then I included a couple of other tournaments that I think are not on that level, but have been major nationals in the past and had decent competition. Tournaments like the Missouri Mule at Central Missouri, tournament like the Washburn Warm-Up, or a tournament like Illinois State's Redbird Invitational. The Big Ten Online did not have nearly the kind of quality of competition that these other tournaments did. So this last weekend didn't really have anybody in my top 10 competing this weekend. So it was really hard for me to like evaluate those. As far as like comparing debaters, same thing with Chad. I looked at consistency, I looked at results, but I also looked at head-to-head matchups with the person that I thought was nearest to you in your kind of ranking. So if there was a close 2 and 3, I looked, has the 2 and 3 debated before and who won those debates? Or if the 4 and 5 debated before and who won those debates? And that was kind of like my final determination. If I thought that something was close, that would be how I would break the tie, is look at head-to-heads. If they ever debated each other, who won those matchups?
Cool. And so I kind of, so both of you, it was great. It sent in like a top 5 and then a top 5 ranked, but then a top 10 in no particular order. And so what I did was I put these together, and I'm going to start with some of the debaters that made the top 10 list for Chad, but not for Dr. Kirk. All right. So here we go. We got Andrew Rea and Grant McKeever. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about these debaters, Chad.
So I thought Andrew Rea had a lot of really top results, and they broke at pretty much every tournament they went to. And I think one thing that kind of hurt Washburn collectively almost was that they went to a lot of tournaments that didn't have as many people in my top 10. So I wasn't able to get as many head-to-head matchups.
Right.
But Andrea, I think, did clear to the quarterfinals at the UNT tournament and lost to Zach Jones, who, spoiler, will be pretty high on my ranking. So I thought they merited some conversation. And then I'm a Grant McKeever stan. I think Grant had a good semester. I would say like they didn't make my top 5 because of consistency, and they never quite made it to those like top elims, the most competitive tournaments. But they went to a lot of tournaments and they broke at a lot of tournaments and they had a lot of big wins this semester. And I thought Grant, I couldn't write the story of this season without thinking about Grant McKeever.
All right. Okay. So we also had a few that were made Justin's list, but not Chad's, and I'll let you talk about these ones right here.
Yeah. So I thought Elijah had a particularly good tournament, whether or not that was because one of my top 5 was ill that day and they got a walkover, but you can't evaluate that in the moment, right? Elijah had a semifinals appearance at one of the toughest tournaments of the year. And I thought that while they weren't super consistent, in many ways, like Grant McKeever, not consistent, it's really hard to write the story of this year without the 3 top Truman State debaters. I think all 3 of them have really kind of risen this year to the occasion. And then Omema is one of my debaters who I think I put in the top 10 because she had a really good run at the Mule. She's only been out once, but she lost a really close debate to somebody who's in my top 5 in finals at that tournament. Basically had a great run up until finals where she debated a top 5 debater in my mind and lost. And from the judges' perspective, an extremely close debate that 1 or 2 arguments could have shifted. So had Omema go out to 1 or 2 more tournaments, maybe she creeps into the top 5. But I definitely think she belonged in my top 10 given the kind of record at a mid-major tournament and getting to around against a top 5 opponent.
All right. So like, I think that's really interesting how, because if I knew enough about the debaters, I would like to see what like a third perspective would be at this point, because like I see you pretty much in agreement where it starts getting really tough to make the call about, top 10 versus, 5 versus, but there were a few that made both of your top 10, but not quite breaking into placing here. So these are the three debaters. Let's start with Eli.
Just consistently well performing all year. Has made leaps and bounds of advancement in their debate skill, their ability to deploy arguments, has won some close, good debates against people. Just generally, I think, is somebody who doesn't lose to people outside of the top 10 and only loses to people who are ranked above them. And that's kind of one of my qualifications is like, are you winning those debates against everybody below you? And are you kind of holding your own against the other 2? Right. And then with Nick and Antonina, I mean, I think Antonina barely missed my top 5 because of a kind of rough weekend at North Texas. One of those results where you're looking at somebody who closed out finals the Alexis Elliott round robin, was in quarterfinals in Kentucky, and just had the worst imaginable draw at the North Texas tournament. And so that's something that she has great wins against good top 10 opponents. And Nick is very much the same way. Nick performed really well at all their tournaments. So I'll let Chad finish up on these.
Yeah. Chad, these are your debaters.
So speaking about Eli, I would agree. I would honestly group Eli and Tina kind of together in the sense that I felt like they could have been in the top 5, but for one, maybe in Eli's case, 2 not amazing finishes. And I would say with Antonina, I mean, obviously she's my debater. So I was like, I want to put her high. But if I was being fair, she did finish very high at a tournament that I hold in a lot of esteem. And she has one of the only wins over a person that's in the top 5. And so she's definitely got high highs, but she also has a low. And the people that are in my top 5, I felt had high highs and no bad tournaments. And so that's why. And then Nick, I would put Nick in their own category because they really didn't have any bad tournaments. They just, I feel never had the great tournament, if that makes sense.
Right.
They never had a tournament where they made the semis. It was, they would win an octo and they would drop in the quarterfinal. And like, so they were pretty close to my next out, actually.
Right.
Just because like there was not really anything knocking them. It was just they don't have a super high finish, which is fine because they're a first semester freshman.
Yeah.
Right. So there was one interesting phenomenon where Chad, you listed someone in your top 5, and it didn't quite make the top 10 for.
I think I know who it is, and it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm going to go with this one right here.
Yep. I knew this was going to happen 100%.
Yeah.
And I can actually talk about why I left Cade out of the top 10 for now. And then I'm going to let Chad kind of talk about why he put him at number 3. I just don't think Cade has had the debates this year. And I think that like Chad would agree with me that like if you're looking at a debate that Cade's in, you can be like, yes, I test top 5 debater. But I think the biggest problem has been their schedule. And when they're doing well at tournaments, they're closing out against other Washburn debaters. And so it's really hard to evaluate elim depth or quality of tournament when you have 2 walkovers in an elim and close out finals. Because then I don't know, I mean, and the other thing is Cade doesn't have debates against some of the better debaters in the country to kind of evaluate those things. I would say that after the Gorlock, Cade will probably be in my top 10 because that will be a tournament where they will get a lot of quality debates and probably get to like quarterfinals, semifinals based on their talent. I mean, this is the debater we're talking about in their sophomore year was in semis at nationals, right? They very clearly are talented. I didn't have the data in my set to like really justify a top 10 here.
Yeah, so pretty much here's what I totally agree with that. I basically just kind of came away with the idea that it was like Washburn had just won so many tournaments and had done so well this semester that one of them had to be in my top 5. Is pretty much how I thought about it. And so I just tried to heavily weight the UNT tournament for them because that was the one that I think they went to that a lot of other debaters were at. And Andrew Rea and Cade did the best at that tournament, so they ranked pretty high in my mind. But yeah, I mean, they've done well at all their tournaments. I think they're one of the better debaters in the country, so that's why they were pretty high on my ranking. All
right. That was probably the most interesting result out of this right there. Yeah. Everything else, it lines up pretty darn well. So what I did was I tried to do a rough average of it. I didn't quite do it mathematically, but if we're getting into the top 5, well, is it 1, 2, 3, 4? Yeah, we're getting into the top 5 now. So I put TT as top 10. So number 4 for one list and top 10 for the other. Zachary Wallenberg.
Zach was in my top 10, and would probably for the only reason the same for Omaima is that they just didn't compete as much as the other people. But the outcomes they had were very good, so I felt like they definitely merited a top ranking, and so I would totally see them in the top 4, especially as someone who sees them every day. So, I would let Justin talk more about them.
Yeah. So I put Zach at 4 because this was a really tough decision between 4 and 5, and the thing that made the decision for me was that Zachary had a head-to-head win against my number 5 at the round robin, and also my number 2. And Antonina, who was in my top 10 at the round robin. And so I think that those results, in addition to being top 4 at the Western Kentucky tournament, even though Zach hasn't been out much, semis at one tournament, tied for 5th at the round robin with big head-to-head wins against other people in the top 5 or splits against other people in the top 5. That was kind of why I bumped them up to 4. I think in a world where, I can see a world where you're moving them into the 6, 7, 8 range because of lack of kind of exposure. And again, one of those worlds where after the Gorlock, when all these debaters kind of are going to see each other one more time, I think these rankings will shake up quite a bit.
All right. So I was a little torn about whether or not to put, Zach at 5 or 4 because both of you had the same outcome for number 5.
Oh, interesting.
If you do it by like mathematical averages, that just bumps John up to number 4 because
I can talk about John real quick and then I'll let Chad go. I think John is one of the most impressive debaters I've seen this year. The results don't match up, but I don't know that I've heard a debater more persuasive. The 2 times I've watched John debate, I was just like, man, they get everything together. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with. The problem is they get to quarters and lose. And for me, you've got to be able to win those close out rounds against the opponents. And lost a quarterfinal round to Zachary Wallenberg at Wiki, which is the kind of key distinction between 4th and 5th for me, was they had a direct head-to-head. And Zach won that debate. And had they not had a head-to-head, I can see a world where I put John slightly ahead of Zach, because semis at UNT, quarters at Wiki, number 3 seed at UNT, just generally consistently performing in the top 5 over and over again.
Right.
Yeah, for me, I thought that they had to be my 5 because it was just consistent. I mean, 5-1 at every tournament they went to this semester. I don't think they dropped in the first elim at any time, and they made, I think, at least 1 deep elim run. So to me, I thought that they were stellar. And I've never even seen them debate. So
oh wow,
I don't even have the context for like the eye test and kind of like an assessment of like how well they are. I mean, I've seen their documents. I've kind of like heard that they're good, but it was just for me like the consistency of the result was so strong over and over again. So I felt like they should be in the top 5.
Right. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy on the next one, but if you average it out, our number 3, Alicia Stout from Truman State. What was I mean, we're getting into the top levels here. I mean, like there's got to be just minor distinctions on what is, like, because like just picking a top 10 by itself is difficult. You know what I mean? Let alone who's going to be number 3, right?
Yeah, and I think this is where we get into the like, you got to really look at the head-to-heads, and elim depth doesn't always matter because all these top 4 are going to be in quarters or semis every tournament. Right. Alicia's big knock was that she was not feeling well on the Saturday or the Sunday of the UNT tournament and had to drop. And so like there is a good chance that tournament could have been the thing that put her into Chad's 3 or my 2, because it was a great tournament. She had good matchups coming up, and one of my top 10 ended up taking over that spot in the elims. But Alicia's consistently top 4 at every tournament she goes to. She won the Missouri Mule, which is traditionally kind of a fall semester. It wasn't as strong this year as far as competition goes, but like good wins at that tournament, and just has good head-to-head wins against some folks in the top 10 that I think are below her, but hasn't really elevated her game to beat either of the top 2 yet.
Okay. What do you say, Chad?
I mean, yeah. What do you say? I mean, I think they're one of the best debaters in the country. I've seen them debate. I think they're very, very good. I think the results match up with what you see. They're one of the most creative students in the country. I think they're very generative. I think it's like one of those students where like their docs don't look like anyone else's. Like they're doing stuff that's very different all the time.
Really?
You look at Truman's docs, and I mean, you can look at initials and see that they're like very generative for their team, and producing a lot of evidence that is driving everyone else's success. And Truman's had a really great semester.
What do you mean that she's creative? You got an example of?
So I think we talked about the mushrooms AF. I think that's.
Is that Alicia?
That's an Alicia original.
Oh wow.
They have a Taiwan app that's pretty creative. Okay. I think they're, from my perception at least, like they're doing a lot to try to innovate a topic that you can be boring and successful on this topic. And I think it's cool that they're trying to be successful and interesting. And yeah, I mean, I agree that if they had been feeling better at UNT, potentially, this is a 2 or a 1. If depending on how those debates had gone, and it's hard to say. Good head-to-head wins. Really, honestly, there's really no knock here. It's just like
no. I mean, like this
not
is like
quite as good as some of the other ones.
Yeah.
And I would say
Like
the other good indication of Alicia's impact is look at their novice this year, Peyton Louders. Has grown so much this semester. And you can't look at that development and not credit Alicia with some of that, because she's clearly the leader on that team and clearly coaching the younger folks up a lot, given the amount of work she does. And so, you know, you can see the results from her impact on that squad down the kind of depth chart a little bit.
Cool. That's a nice way of saying it. The last two, our top two, total agreement. It all aligns. All right. So number 2, we got Zach Jones from North Texas.
I almost put Zach 1, just because I was like, you're being a homer, Chad. I think so. I guess we'll just talk about why Zach's awesome. Then I'll talk about why I made the distinction with the next person. So I think Zach's just like a really great debater, honestly. Like, I've really enjoyed it's one of the people in the top 10 that I've actually judged a ton. And I mean, I just think they're fantastic. We've talked about how we should be filming their 2 ARs and showing them to younger debaters on how to give 2 ARs.
Right.
I would say they're less creative. Both of our top 2 are not very creative. But they're both just like kind of ruthless tacticians, if that makes sense. You know, it's done very, very well. Their arguments are informed. They sound amazing. One of the best speakers, I think. Super clear, fast. I mean, I don't know. It's general for my taste, and I'm just kind of, you know, an old school guy. Just exactly what you want in a debater. It is a Zach Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, the second North Texas team in the top 5 too.
Yeah.
No, North Texas. I could have put another North Texas kid in my top 10.
Joe.
And it was only because of consistency that I didn't. But eye test, I think there's another North Texas debater that's pretty much just as good as everyone we're mentioning.
Yeah, I think the thing about Zach is he's really hard to beat in a debate. He's one of those debaters that will pull a debate out of nowhere, and as a judge, you're like, "Whoa, that was a great rebuttal." Like, I'm going to vote for you now because I didn't see that coming. And then you give him high speaker points because he pulls something out of his hat that, like, you didn't think was possible. I think that's the toughest part about Zach is you may think you have him backed into a corner and he'll figure out a way to win that debate. You know, even if it's just 2 of the 3 judges on the panel, he'll get it done. The other thing I like about Zach is just generally as a community member. I mean, I think everybody top 5. I think, you know, be in agreement that these, not only are they great debaters, but they're all people who contribute to the community and make the community a better place, which I think is really important for debaters who are excellent competitively to also be just like excellent persons, you know?
Excellent.
So I can talk about why I distinguished this debater from what our clearly unanimous number 1 was. And that is one debate. A round robin debate where Zach lost to Antonina, who's in my top 10. Actually, Antonina my number 6, because I think she's just outside of the top 5. He lost a debate to somebody who's 4 ranks below him, and Ray hasn't really. You know, I mean, and the head-to-heads are basically identical across those 2 debaters. They each have 1 win against each other, but Zach he's missing one win, I think, to put him in the top 1. I think that's all it is here is, I mean, and I seriously almost thought about giving these 2 are tied for first.
So did I.
Okay. So I don't feel bad about it because it was very clearly like I'm scratching my head of like, how do I distinguish these 2 and reading through their tab room records from this year and go, that's the loss that sticks out to me at the round robin.
Yeah, they had the same record at the Shirley. Like it's pretty much the same thing.
And Zach was undefeated in prelims this fall. In NFA. Zach has not lost a preliminary debate yet and has only lost, if I recall, 2 debates, 1 to Antonina and 1 to Ray, and that's it. So that's a pretty impressive fall record for number 2.
Oh yeah. Which leaves our number 1 here.
Yeah. And to prevent Chad from being a homer, I can sing Ray's praises here. Ray had probably as good of a semester as you could hope to have for a debater. They were 5-1 in prelims at both the major tournaments that we were talking about, UNT and Wiki. They're 1-1 1-1 against the number 2 debater in the country. They've split 2 final decisions with them. Won the round robin, or I guess split the round robin title with Antonina. And if I remember correctly, Ray was also the top speaker at the round robin. And so I think that is something that was maybe the little extra that put Ray over the top for me. Was in neutral environment, judges thought Ray was speaking better at a more competitive neutral ground like the round robin.
Right.
And honestly, anytime I had trouble making a decision, I went back to the round robin, because that's where everybody's operating with no intel. Everybody's showing up with new arguments, and everybody's got the same kind of guns in their holster. and we're all competing at the same level. And the people who come out on top in those realms, I think, there's no evidence or coaching or things like that necessarily distinguish them. They are doing the better debating that weekend.
All right, Chad, this is your debater.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm pretty stoked with Ray's semester. I think what I like about Ray is that, just like Zach, I would call them just sort of like a gentle giant of debate, in that, like, they are very good. They do debate hard. Maybe they are somewhat aggressive in debates, but like between debates, out of debates, they're very, very nice, very, very kind. Kind of want everyone to feel comfortable, and I really like that component of their presence on our team, on the circuit. In terms of their debating, it's genuinely kind of difficult to distinguish between Ray and Zach. And literally, just like Justin, it came down to the fact that Ray was top speaker and was the top seed out of their pod at the round robin, and Zach didn't make it out of their pod at the round robin. It was pretty much the only difference. So yeah, it just came down to that debate between Antonina and Zach. So Ray maybe owes a little bit of this first seed to his teammate Antonina for that 2 victories. Because it wasn't even a split. It was like a
2-0. Yeah.
The 2-0.
Yeah. Zach lost that debate.
The sole purpose counterplan versus NFU.
Right. Something we've been talking about all semester on this podcast, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So that's why consistency, top results. But yeah, they read the same AF, largely go for the same neg arguments.
Right. Okay. Well, this was very cool. I kind of get to know a little bit about the individual debaters a little bit more and more, rather than just like their role on the team. But seeing the names again in this sort of format, helps somebody who's not really in the community get to know it a little bit better. We are going to be taking ourselves a little break from this, but I hope to come back strong after the winter break and finish out this season and talk about it. Justin, Chad, thank you so much for being a part of this project so far, and I look forward to it when we return.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for a wonderful semester.
Excellent.